Hey, and welcome to the DIY Homebuyer podcast. My name is Nick, your host, and I created this show to empower you to purchase your next home without having to hire a costly buyer's agent, because I believe that is the future of home buying, a future that is more financially efficient, where you're saving $15,000 to $20,000 in buyer agent commissions, as well as a future that puts you in greater control of the home buying process. Plus, I just love all of the skills and confidence that you gain by making such a big decision on your own. So this show intends to give you the kind of resources, insights, and tools that you need to successfully represent yourself and be your own agent. And in this episode, we're going to talk about some negotiation tactics and skills, things to consider, run through some scenarios. But before we dive into that, a couple of things that I want to highlight. First and foremost is our free school community. If you haven't joined that yet, I highly recommend that you do so. This is the best way to get everything out of the DIY Homebuyer Academy, podcast, platform. All of the free resources that I have are there. So everything that you need to learn about self-representation, you're going to find in that school community. But I think the best part is actually connecting with other DIY homebuyers, people that have either successfully gone through the process or they're working through it now, where you're able to ask your questions or share your insights. And that's how together we grow and have the most successful transactions, as well as bring real lasting change to the industry. So do join that. It's entirely free. All you got to do is set up an account with Skool. That's skool.com/DIY homebuyer. While you're looking at the description to click that link, I also would encourage you to subscribe to the show. And as I say weekly, if there's anything in here that you find helpful, please, please, please share it with somebody else that you think would also benefit from the content that I'm creating. Why? Well, because my mission is to change home buying for good in every sense of the word good. And I can't do that without you. For this message to spread and for home buyers to be empowered, I need your help. I need for you to get the word out. So you can partner with me by sharing this episode, subscribing. Really anything that you do to engage with what I'm creating helps it get out further and wider so that we can reach more and more people and hopefully make a real positive impact in the way people buy homes. So thank you for everybody who has subscribed and shared and commented and shared your enthusiasm. Please continue to do so. It's awesome to see the community expanding and growing. All right, this week, talking about negotiation. Negotiation is such a funny thing because there are some people that like you get really excited about the possibility of negotiating, and that's the minority of folks. But it is kind of interesting that in the DIY world, it seems like the personality type that enjoys negotiation also is kind of drawn to DIY. So I realized that while most of the world is uncomfortable in negotiations, probably most of you that are listening to this, you get pretty fired up about it. And that's cool. Like I love that. Negotiations are, it's awesome to be a good negotiator. But you also don't want to be like too keen to negotiate. It can be off-putting. So that's one thing that we'll guard against. And then for others of you that are listening, you may hate negotiations. That actually might be one of your biggest skepticisms about whether or not you can be successful as a DIY homebuyer, is whether or not you can handle the negotiations. So wherever you're at on that spectrum, I want to help just frame negotiations in the context of buying a home. And with any negotiation, we recognize that there are two parties. With buying a home, you've got the seller and you, the buyer. And in general, the The desired outcomes of these two parties are opposed to one another. The seller obviously wants to get top dollar for their home, and they want for there to be as few risks as possible in that deal, which means very few contingencies. It's also why cash offers are generally better, because you're not dependent upon approvals from a bank. Not having inspection contingencies. Sellers don't want for you to look under the crawl space or under the look at the foundation or up in the attic and the roof and find issues that could give you a get out of jail, let you back out of the deal on. So that's what the seller wants: top dollar, clean offers. And you, as the buyer, you're trying to get the lowest possible purchase price on your home, or at least the best possible deal. So even if it is a higher purchase price, you're looking for seller credits. Of course, you want to have every protection available to you so that you've got your financing contingencies, your appraisal contingencies, your inspection contingencies. And that way, if there's any issues with the house, any surprises that come up, you can either renegotiate the deal or back out entirely. So those are the two fundamental, like, opposing forces that we need to move through. And the way that we get through those and come to a deal is through negotiation. And there's no one size fits all strategy for negotiations. That's what's kind of difficult about the home buying process, or really any negotiation, but especially when we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're trying to negotiate over. So, with that caveat in place of that there's no one size fits all, there are some general principles that are going to apply to every negotiation. And at the highest level, I want to start with just talking about taking a collaborative approach toward negotiations, which can sound a little bit oxymoronic, because we're saying that, wait, we've got a buyer and seller that are opposed to one another, and you're proposing that we take a collaborative approach. Well, yes, I am. Another way of thinking about this is taking a win-win approach to negotiations, which I feel like very elementary in saying that. Here's how I'd qualify it. You're looking to frame the negotiations as though you're seeking a win-win scenario for everybody. But of course, you know that in the back of your mind, you want to be the winningest. You want to come out with your desires on top. And that's good. That's fine. I encourage that for anybody, but especially for you as a DIY home buyer. But by framing things in a collaborative spirit where you're looking for everybody to win, it sets everything off on the right footing. It gets you going in the right direction, because one of the major issues in negotiation is when things get personal and when they get highly emotional, and when, this is why people hate lowballs, right? Like when you come in and you make a gross lowball offer, the seller takes personal offense to that. It's no longer like just about the house or the deal. It's like you've somehow slighted them personally. And it really can shut down negotiations, because then instead of them coming back to you with a reasonable response, they're going to come back with an emotionally charged response, where usually their counter offer, if they counter at all, is like way sky high. And you've seen like the pettiness that happens in these kind of negotiations that get heated and highly personal. So we want to avoid that. And the way that we avoid that is by, from the very get-go, framing things in a win-win type of way. So how do you frame everything as a win-win scenario? Well, it starts by trying to understand as best as possible what the seller's motivations and desired outcomes are. And it's easy to assume that, yeah, they want the top dollar for their property. But in real estate, when there's multiple offer situations, you would be shocked at how many times sellers will take an offer that's lower than the highest offer that they've received because the terms of the deal fit better with their goals. And so they'll leave 5, 10, 15, $20,000 in some cases on the table because they like the terms of one deal over the offer that had a higher price. And so just having that mentality or that reality in mind will help you when you're trying to think through, okay, what is it that the seller wants most beyond just price? And it could be that they need a really quick closing, like that they're trying to close on another house and they've had a deal or something that's fallen through. And so price is no longer the number one consideration for them. They want somebody that can close a deal in 2 weeks. Or maybe they just want to know that the person that's buying their house is going to live in it and love it, and that they're not an investor that's looking to tear it down and turn it into a small apartment complex. It could be any number of things, but you having an understanding of where it is that the seller's coming from and what's motivating them is going to really help you frame everything in a win-win kind of way. So understand where they're at and consider that both in your offer and in your communications. And then once you've made your offer and the negotiations begin, this is where you want to have hard data or facts that support either the price or just justify your thoughts behind your offer. And so being able to do your own comparative market analysis, which is something that I do a deep dive on in the school community. So if you want to learn more about that, do join the community and check out that module in the DIY Homebuyer Academy. Again, completely free, and that'll show you how you can run an effective comparative market analysis. But when you do that, then you're able to provide the seller and the listing agent with 3 to 5 comparable properties that really help justify the value. Also, the more that you know about what's happening in the market, whether houses are sitting on the market longer, if there are things that are getting multiple offers, even just knowing like what time of the year you're headed into and whether or not the market is going to slow down or likely pick up, that's going to be something that's helpful for you to know and helpful for you in justifying why you're offering what it is that you're offering. But beyond just having the data, you're not wanting to like just turn over all of the data and say, here's everything that I've got and here's exactly why I'm justifying it. You kind of want to slow roll that. And I like to put things back on the seller with just saying, keeping everything positive. But if they push back like on the price that I'm offering for a home, um, I'll say like, yeah, here's what I've seen other homes that I consider comparable go for. It's hard for me to justify paying more than that, but what do you think? Like, how do I fix that? Help me make sense of it. And it's interesting because when you put it back on them and try and help get them into your shoes and seeing things from your perspective and sort of put the onus on them to solve the problem, most of the time, um, you'll come out ahead for that because people like to be problem solvers. They like to have the opportunity to figure things out for themselves. People like to be seen as reasonable, rational. And so by you not using your data as a bat to beat down on a seller with, but to give it to them sort of, freely, and to suggest it in more of a humble sort of way of just that, like, hey, these are the numbers that I'm working with. Help me make sense of this. Let's, again, collaborate on this and come to a solution together. But you put the onus on them to come to that solution. You're generally going to do better, and you start to build some good rapport and goodwill between you and the seller. So it's just amazing when you can get them on board with trying to find a way to make it work. You get so much further than when you're just like stick in the mud, like, this is the only way I will do it. At least in modern negotiations, that is what I have seen. Now, it does depend a little bit on the personality of the seller and the listing agent. And you will sometimes just have the people that are just like, nope, we are the stick in the mud. Like, this is what it is. And in those cases, you do need to be prepared, one, to just know what a bad deal is and walk away from a bad deal. Like, no house is really worth like paying through the nose for. I shouldn't say, using absolutes is always a dangerous thing. It's very rare that you should back down on what you know or believe to be fair market value on a deal, unless you can, truly be convinced otherwise. Um, I just hesitate to ever recommend that you overpay significantly for a house. Um, I know part of why I hesitate in saying this is because I'm hearing in the back of my mind like all of the arguments of real estate investors that are like, who cares if you overpay even by $20,000? If you keep the house for 30 years, you're going to make that up 100-fold in equity and appreciation. And yeah, from an investor's perspective, that may be right. But coming at it from more of a realist perspective, where if you're buying this as your primary residence and maybe you'll be in it for 30 years, but most likely it's going to be 7 to 10 years, the likelihood of making up that like $20,000 in a shorter time frame, it just is a lot lower likelihood. And you would just hate it if the market turned and all of a sudden you're now underwater in your home and you need to do something different. That's just an awful, awful situation to be in, which is, again, why I hesitate to back down or to overpay more than you're comfortable with for a home. That was quite the digression and rabbit trail. Let's get back on track with negotiations. So, anyhow, you're really just trying to get the seller to solve your problem for you and with you, and that's part of that collaborative spirit. And you do want to play ball so that if there are things that you can give on, do that. The things that aren't really going to be any trouble to you. One of the most common things that I see in residential real estate is if you can give a short rent back period and do so for free. That is a really nice benefit to a lot of sellers where you close on the property on, let's just say, the first of the month, but then you give them 10 days to move out of all of their belongings and to turn over the house to you. And the way that I would do this is set a daily rate, $200 a day or $500 a day, whatever it is that makes sense. Have that as an escrow holdback. So if it's $200 a day and it's 10 days, then $2,000 that is held in escrow. And then if they move out by the end of those 10 days, then the escrow company releases that $2,000. The seller gets that back. But then you've got some security just in case they don't move out. You're able to get all of that money as kind of a consequence of them not adhering to the agreement. It does depend a little bit on state by state. So as we talk about rent back periods, this is a area where it would be good to talk with a real estate attorney, just to make sure that you understand if there's any sort of like, if they don't move out in that period, what's the process for eviction? What kind of rights do they have as a tenant in your state? Because that can be a bit of a nightmare, but those situations are so seldom. And the point here just being that find ways that you can give that aren't really going to harm you, but might make a big difference to the seller. There's also a few strategies for negotiation that you can come in with. Generally, if you're looking for more protections for yourself as a buyer, you're going to want to come in with a higher purchase price. So let's say that you're looking at a home that's $750,000 is the list price on it. And that seems to be about fair market value. You could see some comps that say 725, other comps that say 775. Um, but you have some concerns and you want to make sure that you have every contingency available to you, and not just the contingencies, but that you've got good long periods, so that instead of just like a 10-day inspection period, maybe you want 20 days so that you can really have time to review reports and have time to get additional inspectors in there. Well, if you're going to ask for what these would be buyer friendly terms or a lot of protections, then you may want to offer an additional $5,000 or $10,000 even over the list price to help make your offer more attractive. And this is again kind of that like win-win sort of balance of where you're saying, all right, I'm going to give more upfront on the purchase price in order to compensate for all of the extra protections that I'm asking for. And then, of course, while you're going through your inspection contingencies, most likely there's reasons for why you have those concerns. And so maybe there are some big things that come up, like the roof is recommended that it be replaced. Well, now you can negotiate a $20,000 credit, $10,000 price reduction and a $10,000 credit. And boom, all of a sudden, before you know it, you're below what the original list price was because you've opened up other negotiation scenarios for yourself. The opposite strategy would be, if it's a newer home or if you're really handy yourself and you're not worried about inspections, then you can offer a lower price, but with seller friendly terms where you waive a lot of contingencies or you have very, very short contingency periods. Because again, you're just trying to balance the attractiveness of your offer. So you realize that more contingencies make the offer less attractive. So you need to balance that out with a higher purchase price, and vice versa. If you've got zero contingencies essentially, or very minimal contingencies, then that's a really attractive piece. And so you can balance it by having a lower purchase price. And that also bleeds into, as I sort of alluded to, a couple of different negotiation strategies where usually if you have fewer contingencies, yes, you're wanting to negotiate the best possible price up front. And if you have a lot of contingencies, then that's where your opportunity is to negotiate a lower purchase price, is through those inspections, as well as maybe there's an appraisal issue or whatever may come up. Just knowing that, okay, during my contingency window, that's when I'm going to negotiate the best possible deal. The thing that you don't want to do is try and negotiate the best possible price up front and then renegotiate even lower when it comes to appraisals, contingencies, inspections. I mean, yeah, sometimes it happens where it's like something big, major comes up. I've had it happen with like sewer scope kind of things, and we find a big blockage in the sewer, and all of a sudden that's a $7,000 or $8,000 job to clear the blockage, replace the sewage line, rip up the front yard, and it's like, okay, sorry, seller, but we're gonna need to negotiate another $8,000 here. Either you're going to do that repair or you're going to give us an $8,000 credit, even though we were already aggressive on the front end with negotiating down the purchase price in the original offer. That happens sometimes, but just know in those situations, it's a lot more likely for the seller to just say, forget it. I'll just go back on to the market because they already feel like they have given as much as they're willing to give. They already had to swallow that pill of a lower purchase price than they were wanting up front by accepting your offer. And now you're asking them for even more, versus the mentality of that, like, oh, wow, like this person gave me full asking price, or, oh, this person gave me even more than asking price. So of course I've got, more margin, or at least this feeling of goodwill of like, hey, they're really trying to work with me. I want to work with them. That would be my argument for if you've got longer contingency period, more protections for yourself, you want to come in with a higher purchase price so that your initial offer is attractive, and so that you set yourself up well to be able to negotiate a better deal later on. And the general vibe, though, that you want to keep is just a positive, productive, cooperative attitude towards the seller and all of your communications and everything that you communicate to the listing agent. You want to take that like positive, hey, I think we're going to find a way forward here approach. Hey, I really want to work with you. Let's get creative. Let's do what we need to do. I believe that there's a path forward. Just continue to reinforce that, and then continue to reinforce the idea of fairness. Everybody wants to be seen as fair. One of the worst things that you can accuse another human of is being unfair. And so you want to lead the charge in that, in all of your communications with the seller or their agent, of just saying, hey, I'm looking for fairness here. And, I believe that I came in with a fair offer, but based upon these findings and these inspections, like that really changes the math for me. And so I'm looking for a fair path forward. I think it's fair for the seller to cover this. Let's talk about it, kind of deal. And again, that's where if they come back and they say, no, like we don't want to cover it. And it's like, then you tell them, well, hey, I've only got this much money that I've allocated. I'm bringing all of this for my down payment plus all of these closing costs. Like I don't have the money to make these repairs. And therefore, like if we can't find a way forward, I'm going to have to walk away from the deal. So you tell me, like, what do you see as a path forward? What do you see as a good solution? And again, you just put it back on them to come up with that solution. People feel really good about the solutions that they come up with. People love ideas that are their own, even if that idea was kind of suggested by you. If they come up with it, they're sold on it. And I've just found that to be a really effective way to go of let them bring you your desired solution, which there's a few more pieces to that, like a situation going back to a roof recently. Um, we, I was working with a client, a buyer, DIY home buyer, and she had gotten a quote. She had gotten an inspection. The inspector said that the roof was wearing unevenly, probably because of the sellers had pressure washed it instead of doing like a soft wash, which caused a bunch of the granules to fail. Anyway, there was just issues. So we had a couple of roofers come out. Both of the roofers recommended that the roof be replaced, which, side note, they're always going to recommend the roof be replaced. And we got two quotes. One was like 14 grand. The other was 18 grand. And the buyer that I was working with, my client, she wanted a $10,000 credit towards closing costs because she wasn't worried about the roof failing right away. She also has family members that are in the trades and we're going to be able to do it themselves for a whole lot cheaper than the quotes that she had received. So the way that the negotiations went was she knew that her desired outcome was a $10,000 credit. So instead, she asked for an $18,000 credit to cover the full cost of a roof replacement based upon the quote, the higher quote that she had been given. And she did that knowing that the seller was most likely going to say no. That's too much, and the roof is not in imminent danger of failing. But by anchoring at that $18,000 ask and coming back to the seller and just saying, this is an issue that came up and it's something that I'm going to be responsible for, all of a sudden that gives her a lot of room for further negotiation, because now she can put it back on the seller. She did put it back on the seller to just say, okay, I've got this $18,000 bill that I've got to deal with. I don't have the funds or desire to deal with it. So what's your solution? And the seller comes back and is like, well, $9,000 sounds fair. That's splitting the cost. And she said, yeah, that sounds fair, but actually, because I'm taking on more of the risk, it could fail sooner. Prices could go up. What about a $10,000 credit? And at that point, $10,000 still sounds like a whole lot less than $18,000. Actually, objectively, it is a lot less than $18,000. Um, and the jump from 9 grand to 10 grand is hardly anything. And they were the ones that had already suggested a $9,000 credit. So really, all she had to negotiate was an additional $1,000, which was pretty easy. It was a whole lot easier than had she have just said, like, I'd like a $10,000 credit. So that's something to keep in mind as well in your negotiation strategy of using anchoring points. Now, again, when it comes to the price on a home, this is where you're walking a fine line. Like when you're sending your initial offer, you don't have any rapport with the seller. You really don't want to lowball unless you've got great comps and data that justify your value, and you're not just being a jerk. So don't try and use anchoring in lowballing, but it is kind of interesting where you're able to use anchoring when you have other goals in negotiations, where you set something, either a ridiculously high ask, knowing that you're going to try and get to your goal, which is in the middle. That's a really helpful tool to start with a bigger ask than what you ultimately want, so that it does feel like you're giving quite a bit in the negotiations as well. Because again, you want it to feel like a win-win. And that's what's interesting, is that you think about the sellers when they're talking with their friends or family members about how the transaction is going, and they're like, oh my gosh, the buyer asked for an $18,000 credit. We said no, but we ended up coming to an agreement of a $10,000 credit. And, wow, we feel good about that because that's $8,000 less than what she originally asked for. And so they're feeling like, whew, we dodged a bullet. We won there. And my client got exactly what she ultimately wanted, which was that $10,000 credit. And so she also won. It was a win-win situation, but who won the most? Well, I would say my client did, because she's the one that got what she really wanted out of the deal. The sellers wanted to give $0 total, and she was able to get an additional $10,000 off because of this negotiation strategy. Probably a million other directions that we could go with this, but hopefully there's enough of like a case study, some examples, and just some principles to put into place as you think about negotiations. But again, I'll just say it over and over, that the main thing is to take that like cooperative win-win approach, where of course you come out as the winningest. So if you found anything helpful here, do be sure to subscribe to the show, as well as share it with a friend. As I mentioned earlier, I've got a whole nother module that's just on negotiations, negotiation strategies. So if you do want a deeper dive and some additional resources on this very topic, hey, I've got a free community, school community, skool.com/DIY homebuyer. Join that. Take the DIY Homebuyer Academy course, completely free to you. There's that module on negotiations. That'll go even deeper than what we're able to do in this podcast episode. And then, of course, if you have questions, most platforms where you're watching this, there's the ability to comment or to message me. I would love to hear from you. I'm going to reply to absolutely every comment that I receive. So if you've got an experience to share, or a question that I didn't answer, or you think that I'm full of crap, hey, I'm here to hear it, to reply. So let me know in the comments below what you think. That's all I got for you this week. We'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, all the best to you as a DIY home buyer. Let me know how I can help.